Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is, we are IV number 6. We've been talking a great deal about how the church might be looking differently in the future. The truth is, what we're really seeking to do is helping the church look different in the future by helping it look like what it did look like in its origination. In other words, the two choices that most churches have is whether they will look more like the 20th century church or more like the first century church. And so this, the current crisis has obviously accelerated the conversation quite a bit. And there just could not be a better time to think about what a church looks like as a vibrant expression of Jesus Christ in the 21st century world. And in order to have a vision of what that looks like, we are really better off kind of going back and reconnecting with what the church looked like in the first century. So I'm just going to mention some issues today. And again, these are kinds of issues that when it's possible for us to regather, I look forward to the kinds of conversations that we can have. Today I want to talk about a church that develops people spiritually. Basically, churches have, had to decide whether they want to focus on spiritual development of people, or whether they want to focus on designing church programs. That's certainly not to say that they are mutually exclusive. And that's not to say that church programs are not necessary, but it is to say that oftentimes in our present modeling of church, we have been focusing, or most churches have been focusing, on programs and how to get people into those programs. And a church is typically considered successful if it has a lot of programs and a lot of people in those programs. Well, what I'm going to try to do is just shift that conversation and make it about whether people are growing spiritually in such a way that they look more like Jesus. It's obviously a lot easier to measure programs. We could talk about how many programs a church has, who leads the program, when it's offered, how many people come, and all of those kinds of things. And again, those things are not evil or anything like that. This is just trying to reshift the conversation to how do we talk about people's spiritual growth? Do we talk about it in terms of how many church activities they are involved with? If not, then the conversation does need to shift. If spiritual activity and being spiritually vibrant in our following Jesus is not measured by church activity, then obviously what is it measured by? And this would be a great way for us to kind of, give honest assessment to whether we are truly focusing in, as we should, on developing people for Christ, or whether our interest is in trying to get programs up and running. So when we talk about developing people for Jesus, that is really, it's a great pursuit. It's certainly a biblical vision. And it's something that, as a church family, we want to be clearly engaged in, but it's very difficult to measure. It's not like you could just take a list of things and check the boxes. Spiritual growth is different than that. It does involve a number of indicators. Think about a baby, and a child growing from infancy into childhood, into being a young boy or girl, into teenage years and so forth. And there are a number of indicators that they are doing that, but it's really more complex than just checking off birthdays and saying, oh, okay, now that he or she is a 2-year-old, that signifies a change, or now that they are 12 or preteen, and all those kind of things. But there are things you can't measure, like how healthy are they growing or maturing in their ability to, let's say, have an imagination, in their ability to do basic logic, or to think reasonably about things, or to understand the world, or to have a conversation, to play well with another child, or to listen to what their parents are saying, or to make friends, or all of those things. When you start thinking about the multiple numbers of things that go into assessing our growth as human beings, they just fill the room, and it's not an easy thing to do. Well, when churches move the conversation from thinking strictly in terms of programs into developing disciples or developing people, it does get far more messy, but it is a far better way for us to invest in each other, to see what God is doing in our church family, in living and interacting with each other. And although in one sense it is more complicated to assess, the truth is it's really liberating, it is compelling. It's very much like, let's say, marriage. If all marriage was a checking of the boxes, like one partner will cook dinner, the other partner will clean the dishes, one will go get the groceries, one will cut the grass, and if that is all the marriage comes down to, you can see that that's just a kind of a crude way of creating boxes or compartments, programs that each of the marriage partners, if that's what marriage is about, checking off each of the boxes or each of the duties or each of the things that participate in, that would certainly, for most marriages, probably get kind of trite and old and boring, and you do these things out of a sense of duty, or perhaps even shame, or you don't want to feel guilty. But marriage is actually a liberating relationship between two people that just cannot be reduced to the kinds of things I have just mentioned. There's a mystery about it. There's something that is vibrant about it. There's something that is beautiful about it. Think about churches doing the same thing. There's something mysterious about following Jesus Christ that can't be quantified. There's something beautiful about it that just can't be put down on paper. There's something vibrant about it that can't be represented by a number. And when we begin to think about our church in terms of developing people, that takes on a different culture perhaps than just saying we have these programs and we would like for you to fill these programs and be a part of these programs and attend them and support them and those kinds of things. And so I'm just going to, I'll be encouraging us to think about at Ivy, how do we develop, in what ways do we live among ourselves, and in what ways do we see God's Spirit working within us that helps us to become disciples of Jesus Christ. Part of the story of the modern church and the programs that churches have kind of goes back to what happened throughout World War II, when in order to engage successfully in the war, we had to develop a service economy. And I mean, people were at work, and people who would not have been doing certain kind of jobs were thrust into places doing things that they would have never probably dreamed that they were doing. As a result of that, as time went on, we began to become more of an outsourcing economy. In other words, if we wanted a particular thing, we would outsource it. If there was a particular good or service, we would outsource it. And typically, as churches tend to do, the church began to kind of track or began to mimic somewhat what was happening in the larger culture, and churches began to outsource things. And as they did that, what happened, or what can easily happen, is that a church actually ends up, if you're not thinking about it, outsourcing spiritual formation. That is, trusting some company or business or outfit to be the primary means. And there's nothing wrong with any of those businesses, companies, and outfits. But we get lulled into thinking that they are our primary source for spiritual development, rather than just being a tool. We begin to see them as something that provides to us a service that we're willing to pay for, that hopefully provides spiritual growth. The reality is that although those might be helpful resources, none of them actually produce the kind of spiritual vitality and discipleship that we see in, again, we'll use Jesus, as we often do, as our model in how Jesus invested in his disciples. The real issue when it comes to spiritual growth and spiritual vitality, and how God's Spirit is moving and how we discern that and understand that, the real issue with all of that is, how do we engage life in all of its rhythms, in all of the things that we do on every single day? How does Christ express himself in that? Many of us might have to get up and go to a certain place of work or vocation, or maybe take care of children, or pay the bills, or attend to other relationships or other chores that have to be done. What makes Christianity such an incredible movement of God is not that all of a sudden we pause everything that we're doing so that we can run off and participate together in a program. What makes Christianity a vibrant movement in our world is that in what you are already doing, where you already are, whatever you are already engaged in, you are living out the life of Christ in that context. So if you're in a school, or if you're in a workplace, or if you're in a grocery store, or you're on a ball field, or you're visiting somebody in a retirement community, or you're taking care of parents or children, or somebody's taking care of you, whatever it is, it makes no difference. Spiritual life and spiritual vitality is about the expression of Jesus through us in our normal life patterns. And so once we begin to think in those terms, then we can begin to, probably with more clarity, ask questions like, how can we equip each other? What are the resources that are necessary for you to be most productive, to be most vital, to be most vibrant in the life that you're already living? How would Christ look in that? What encouragement do you need? And so I think you can see the difference between just having a program and hoping that somehow a program in and of itself will produce spiritual vitality, and kind of an approach that Jesus implemented with his disciples. And what he did, he didn't show them things that he outsourced. He showed them life. He showed them this village. He showed them a leper. He showed them sinners. He showed them how to eat at the tables of thieves and thugs and people that no one else would eat at their table. He showed them how to pray. He showed them how to listen to God. He showed them how to live sacrificially. He showed them generosity. He showed them grace. And he was a mobile lab of spirituality. And the Gospels don't try to quantify what Jesus did. There's no checklist or check boxes in the Gospels that simply say, on any given day, Jesus did this, 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 and this, and this is what he had his disciples do. They are just beautiful, beautiful narratives of how Jesus lived every day afresh, and how he invited his disciples into sharing that experience and modeling that experience with him. And sometimes they didn't get the life he was living, and sometimes it was clear, and sometimes it was all muddled, even to the point that when Jesus got to the cross, the disciples were still trying to figure out, what is this life, and why are there death threats, and he's about to be crucified, and what do we do now? And are they going to come after us? All of those kinds of issues. And so as we pursue what it means to develop people, it means that we're going to have greater investments in each other's lives. And in part that means that we have to somewhat discipline ourselves from doing church or living like church as if it were a business, and structured like a business and operates like a business. Those are really powerful temptations for churches to fall into. And when we do that, we even begin to see other people as potential customers. Actually, you probably have too heard people say, I hope this new person joins the church. And what we're kind of saying in that, and sometimes I've even heard the words, it will help our budget, it will be another person who sits in another chair or pew, and we'll have another person in our program. When we should be thinking, is this a person that God is sending to us that we are going to help shape their spiritual life? We're going to help walk with them through their life so that they can experience Christ and what Christ looks like in their daily rhythms. So in the next several sessions that we share together, I'll just continue to unpack this particular conversation in ways that I hope will be helpful in having this particular conversation, and ways that we can be totally focused on and designed around developing people in Christ, and have the great joy of just watching them be shaped and watching them grow, and even in our own lives, being very open about our own spiritual growth and the need that we all have, no matter how long we've been in church, the need that we all have and the deep longing and desire that we share to be more like Christ, and how that plays out in our natural and daily rhythms of life. So, I look forward to us having more of these kinds of conversations. Hope you have a great week, and we will look forward to seeing you for the next time we gather. May God bless you.